And I'm glad you guys came back tonight after this morning's message. You know, it's always funny to talk about money because, again, people will get offended because you just talk about it at all. People will not come to church because they're going to, if he's going to talk about money, I'm not coming. And it's really a heart sign. It is. Like, that just shows that there's something going on there where, you know, in a relationship, in a marriage, if there's a subject that can't be addressed in the marriage without there being tension, well, there's an issue there, right? I mean, we should be able to talk about stuff openly and freely. And if a subject gets us so in the flesh that we can't have a conversation, it's like, well, we need to check where our hearts are at. And I had lots of positive feedback. Roberta said she loved the message, but I think that's like unfair having Roberta's input on the message on giving. You guys couldn't see it, but I'm up higher. As soon as the message started, she pulled pom-poms out of her purse, and she was just kind of doing it, little cheers there. No. Okay, so Bible and money. I'm going to start with just a few verses, and I think I want to say the love of money. We did these verses this morning, but I really think this is what kicks it off and reminds us of what the main thing we're talking about is where is our heart at? And when Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, I mean, that's the thing is we don't realize that my heart is where my treasure's at. And when you go look at like Billy Graham's quote, and I think Billy Graham actually was really quoting D.L. Moody, because D.L. Moody said, I can tell you more from a man's checkbook than from his prayer book about his spiritual life. And it honestly is. You're just seeing, you know, it's not wrong having a hobby. We'll talk about some of that stuff later too. It's not wrong investing things that you're into. It's not wrong buying some frivolous stuff if you have the ability to do so and you want to have some fun and spend some money or whatever. It's not wrong to do fun things with our money, but at the end of the day, we can see how we invest, how we handle, how we treat in a general pattern, and that's really a sign of where our heart is at. Same chapter, Matthew 6, Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says that no one can serve two masters. He'll either hate the one and love the other, or will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, the God of money or representing money, you know. And the thing with that is that the Sermon on the Mount is filled with hyperbole. You know, these extreme, you know, cut off your hand and cast it away. Pluck out your eye and throw it away. But he was trying to drive home points, and he used very extreme language. And I think we all know that it might not be such a dichotomy as we see here, where there's either hating this one and loving this one, or hating this one and loving that one. But ultimately, there is something, though, when we have a real love of money, well, that creates a problem because we defend the things we love, we cater to the things we love, we foster the things we love. And so when our money gets attacked and we love it so much, we protect it, and we shield it, and we hide it. And that's the thing is like, well, when God is the thing we love most, he doesn't need our protection. He doesn't need us to cater to him. It's a beautiful relationship. But when it's things and stuff, there's a problem. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, it is a great chapter dealing on money. And in verse 6, I think is just one of the key verses. Godliness with contentment is great gain. If we could learn to be content with what we have and live godly lives, we're doing really well. And you don't need money if you're content. I mean, at the end of the day, things cost stuff. But at the end of the day, it really is. It's like, are you content with a 42-inch TV? Or are you only content with 50? Or are you only content with 60? Or are you only content with a TV as big as David's? I mean, that's the whole point. He told me a great story about a sale on a mismatched price at Walmart that he got a great deal on. But that's the thing. It's like, what are you content with? Are you content with a car that goes this fast, or do you have to have a car that goes that fast? Are you content with clothes that cover your body, or are you only content with designer clothing? Are you content with clothes that have holes because you wore them, or only content with clothes that you bought from the store that have holes in them? I mean, that's the whole thing is like, at the end of the day, your contentment is kind of like where the money plays in. If you're not content, that you feel like you need more money to get the thing that makes you content, but instead of seeking the money, just seek the contentment. Have God give you a peace and learn to be content with what you have. And there's a lot of rich people who are miserable. There's a lot of poor people who are happy. And yet having a decent financial setup and having an okay, decent amount of wealth doesn't hurt contentment either. I mean, like, there's those things, I think I've heard Dave Ramsey make jokes about it, just the idea of being is like, well, having money doesn't hurt my contentment. You know, it's like, it doesn't hurt having the money. And again, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, again, I think this is a little hyperbole because all kinds isn't in there. The actual Greek just says all evil. Now, we know that's not true biblically. That's how we can sometimes take multiple texts and realize Paul's probably speaking broadly, which is why most commentators, or not commentators, most Bible translators translate all kinds of evil. But we didn't even talk about the second part, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And that's the reality of it, is that there are people who walked with the Lord, had a good thing going, and because of a love of money and pursuing money, they went down a wrong turn. And they went from regular church attenders who are faithful, who are being blessed, who are being used by God, into something else. Because their career changed, their goals changed, their desires changed, and they chased after money instead of God. And the last verse, again, one we did this morning, that in the parable of the sower, there are the obviously unsaved ones that go by the wayside, the seed at the wayside. There's the obviously saved and thriving ones that bear fruit 20, 40, 60, 100-fold. There's the false convert amongst the stony soil. Sprouts up, it seems, but really as soon as any true test, the sun, trials, and temptations, it just dies. It's a dead plant. It's not living. But the seed amongst the thorns is a living plant, and it's honestly, we're probably, I'll just say, the majority of the Christian church in America is somewhere in those middle two sections. I think there are a lot of false converts in the church these days. I also think that there's a lot that are not bearing any fruit or hardly any fruit, and it's because of the cares of this world. That's the word translated anxieties and worries in other places, and then the deceitfulness of riches. And again, it's not being rich. They're not being stunted because of being rich. They're being stunted because of the deceitfulness of riches, the thoughts of riches, the dreams of riches, and the cares and worries around riches. And so it's this mentality and how we think and feel about money that's the problem, because money is amoral. Money is not good. Money is not bad. There's no morality to money, but our hearts and our intentions and our thoughts concerning money, that is something that has a morality to it. And so I'd like to actually take a look at least one full text tonight, maybe not all the text, but Proverbs 31. Now, we know this, the latter portion, 10 to the end, as the virtuous wife. It actually was written about Nicole. At least the best scholars say. And it says, who can find a virtuous wife? Her worth is far beyond rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. Now, from here forward, up until almost the end, it describes her activities. If you notice, the primary features of this woman is she is a frugal woman who is a great steward with the money of her home. And she's a hard worker. And really, all the traits we see in her, those are the traits we're going to talk about tonight. And I would say this, if she has such traits, how much more ought the head of her household have such traits? If her husband is supposed to be the leader and provider of the family and she has such traits, how much more should he? And so I think it's a great guide for men and women of just what leading a godly household and with wisdom looks like. And so I'll try to just go quickly because there's a lot to cover as always. But it says, verse 12, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. And so first off, she's a worker and she knows how to make stuff and do stuff. She knows how to take things and make it. I think there's something about having skills and crafts, knowing how to sew, knowing how to work on your own car, knowing how to, building skills where we can actually provide for our family and not have to pay someone else to do it is a good thing. It's a practical thing, and it's a money saver. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. And so it just talks about bringing in her food, knowing where to get good sources. So again, knowing where to get things. Verse 15, she also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She rises early to get to work. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. I've known women who have joined like little clubs. This is becoming less popular just in my generation, but in generations past, it was much more common to have like clubs where people did like an activity together, and they just don't see that in my age very much, and younger, obviously. But I know women, I can't remember, it was my grandma and my aunt and other women I know, but they joined like a stock investing club. And with other women, they invested in stocks together. And they learned how to invest in stocks together. They investigated and researched together and then invested. And this is her, like she considers a field and she buys it. Well, then from her profits. So whether she bought low and sold high, or she bought a profitable vineyard that could produce money from it, she researched, invested, and then from her profits, she planted a vineyard. So here's the field and the vineyard. So again, it's like she was researching, investing, and then taking profits and reinvesting. So this concept of investing, it's a biblical concept, and knowing how and learning how. It says she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. So for what it's worth, she stays in good, healthy shape so that she can get all the things done that she needs to do. She perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out by night. The idea is that she's checking the status of her affairs. She perceives her merchandise is good. She knows the condition of things. I could probably spend the entire night boasting about my wife, but I won't. I'll only spend half the night boasting about my wife. But it's like my wife knows good deals. When you go to the store, and I'm not going to name my mom by name, but I just remember once going to the store and my mom saw butter on sale, and we were at QFC, which QFC, if you didn't know what the acronym stands for, it stands for really expensive food. And we went to QFC and on the west side, back home where I grew up, and she sees a butter sale, so she buys a little extra because it was on sale. And when I get back, I told my wife what we paid for it, and she was like, I wouldn't have paid half that for that butter. But it is, unless you know what the good prices are for butter, for meat, for this, for that, how do you know? And it says her lamp does not go out by night. And that's just the idea of you need to know how much oil is in your lamp, how much oil it takes to get you to the end of the night, and plan and prepare and do it. And so this is just an encouragement, really just knowing what it takes to run a home, knowing what things cost, knowing what things take. It's a lot to know, and it's a commitment to learning these things. And you learn things little by little. So if you feel like you're behind on this, hey, it's one step at a time, one lesson at a time. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. So she's working, and she's sewing, she's making. She extends her hand to the poor. She reaches out her hand to the needy. She's generous, which we'll talk more about. She's not afraid of snow, for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. Once again, she sees the future, she sees what's coming, and she prepares for it. We'll talk about this in a little, actually later tonight when we do kind of the nuts and bolts stuff, but I'll just mention it now. I always laugh, I always chuckle at Dave Ramsey when he's doing his little spiel, in his class, financial peace. And he's just, facetiously pretending he's one of these people who always is out of money. And he's just like, honey, did you know Christmas is in December this year? And because people sometimes seem like they're surprised, like Christmas just showed up. Birthday just showed up. Anniversary just showed up. Did you know that kids get sick? Did you know that cars need oil changes? And it's like, we should know these things. And so she's not afraid of snow because she knows that when this event, because snow you don't plan on. And they didn't even have a weatherman to get it wrong, right? I mean, they just know that snow might happen, it might not happen. But if snow happens, we're prepared. Financially, we should be the same way as Christians. We should just be prepared, knowing these are things that come at us, so they should not catch us off guard. It may not snow at all this coming winter. It might snow the entire winter. But knowing that snow does come, at least having some kind of a plan, we're prepared for it. She makes herself a tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. This is just talking about her actually being able to buy nice things. Her husband's known in the gates. He sits amongst the elders of the land. Talks about her husband's respectable. She makes linen garments and sells them, supplies sashes for the merchants. Again, she's making more money on her side hustles. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in the time to come when she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. We kind of figured that one out from reading before. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Again, I can't think of these verses without thinking of my own wife, because she's such a planner and she's so diligent. Me, not so much. But I think that's why God paired us together. Whoop. Why God put us together, because he knew that someone had to be the better planner, and one of us is good at talking in front of people, and one of us is preparing it so the whole house doesn't fall apart while he's preparing to talk in front of people. But that's the thing, is like, these are all qualities and traits. Men and women, they're great qualities. And so I thought Proverbs 31 was just a great text to walk through, not just to do on Mother's Day, not just to talk about women, but really talk about responsibility and planning, frugality, stewardship. This is all the things that are talked about with this virtuous wife. And I will throw this out here too, that someone I read, they were saying that, this isn't really talking about what a wife should be like. This is more symbolic. But they were really pushing that kind of to an extreme. And I backed up as like, no, I think this might not have been a literal woman. Maybe it was a literal woman that was being written about here. But I think these are all very literal things. Like, I think they relate differently to our day. She bought the field. I talked about stocks. But I really think these are very literal qualities to look for in someone, and for someone to strive for. That, okay, I might not ever be all of these. Maybe I'm just not very gifted in these areas, but these are good things to seek out, to be good at these qualities and good at these traits. And so, speaking of just work ethic, the Bible has a lot to say. And so we're just going to move through a handful of verses, because this is a big part of the whole thing with money, is we need good work ethic. We need to be hard workers who can earn a worthy wage. Colossians 3:23, and whatever you do, do it heartily and as to the Lord and not to men. I have heard many stories from pastors whom I've listened to, and stories from personal friends where on the job site they've been asked if they're a Christian. Yes. How'd you know? Because of the way you work. And listening to construction foremen who recognize that their Christian employees work harder than their non-Christian employees. Their Christian employees do not take extra long breaks like their non-Christian employees. And so we should work that way, where people tell, these guys are different. Why? It's because they're Christians. Proverbs 16:3, commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. And that word for thoughts is more literally, your plans will be established. And so there's just this idea of when I commit everything I do to the Lord, when I do Colossians 3:23, well, God then establishes the plans. God makes things work out in a way that will glorify him and honor him. And so it is just something about deciding that everything I do, I'm doing for God. Therefore, I need to do it with the integrity and the work ethic like I'm doing it for God, and then it'll get God's blessing. Proverbs 14:23, in all labor there is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty. And realistically, you can work hard at anything and oftentimes become fairly successful. And I know people who've gotten jobs at McDonald's, but they worked hard at McDonald's, and they moved up the ladder at McDonald's. And I think of like my friend Paul Jones from Ellensburg, for a while there, he decided to get out of the business, but he owned multiple fast food restaurants, a chain of restaurants in Washington. How did he get there? He got a job at McDonald's. And he moved up to manager. Well, then he moved up to like the head manager of the whole, building. Well, he did such a good job, they put him as a manager over multiple McDonald's. He got scouted by Arby's. Arby's came and recruited him to leave McDonald's and go over to Arby's. Then he got moved up to Washington and got put over like all the Arby's in central Washington. He's the one who closed the Arby's in Sunnyside. And it is. And then eventually he started buying his own places, and banks would loan him money because he had such a successful record of fast food business. What did he do? Kid with a high school diploma, barely. He barely got out of high school, ends up way up because he worked hard. It didn't actually matter. Now, again, going to college with a degree for a specialized trade is always a fairly safe avenue when you know this is the job I want, here's the way to get there. But again, you could, as long as you're working hard, there's usually profit, but idle chatter leads to poverty. Sitting around and talking about all you plan to do isn't going to get you very far. We mentioned this verse this morning, 2 Thessalonians 3:10. If anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. This is a good principle to help teach people. I'm not trying to be mean or heavy-handed or anything, but it's just the idea that our nation is declining. And one reason I believe America is declining is because, and I forget who said it, but this is like back to Rome, like ancient Rome, where they said basically that republics where people do the voting and whatnot, they're all destined to fall apart because when the people realize that they can vote themselves things, eventually it's going to crumble. When people realize I get to vote and I can vote to give myself stuff, eventually that falls apart because there's nothing to give. And the concept that we have to work for stuff. And I've always had 1,000 theories. I won't fill your ears or heads with them tonight, but on ways, we could try and make balance with things where it's kind of like, there's a lot of jobs that need to get done in this nation. And it's like, well, we should work on getting people into those jobs rather than just, giving out money. We should do this and that. And it's also a thing that many of those programs were designed to give people a step up. And I have no problem with people who have that mentality. I'm in a season where I need help. I'm going to take that help to get myself to a place to where I can help others someday. And there's no shame in that, I don't think. And so, but again, understanding, knowing we got to work hard. We have to have this mentality. Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. The long story short is there is honor in being good at what you do. And it doesn't even matter what you do. I went to the library the other day on Friday. We watched a juggler. He was really good at juggling. Now, you might think of juggling to be an area, not the most handy trait in the world. You have to be very handy actually to juggle. But what does juggling get you? Well, was he 30 or 40 countries he says he's gone before, and he's talked about juggling before, high up, political people and famous people with his juggling stuff. His final thing he did was the stairway of swords where he's walking up machetes with his bare feet, and juggling knives, juggling swords, he said we should say, because you weren't there to see it, so I can say whatever I want is what he told me. But funny guy, but you know what? He excelled at juggling. And I don't know if he actually stood before kings, but quite close. Get good at what you do. Find out what you're good at and get good at it, and you'll get respect and honor and glory for those things, and you can glorify God the very same way. This guy I don't think was a Christian, but you can glorify God with it all. It's like, yeah, God's been with me and God's helped me. Last but not least, as far as work ethic, do all things without complaining and disputing. We shall stare at that one for a minute. I jokingly say sometimes that this is my children's first memory verse. But I'm not totally joking. I teach my kids at a young age. What is Philippians 2:14? Do all things without complaining and disputing. You teach them that disputing is just arguing back. And complaining, they know what complaining is. Whining, moaning. When the Bible says don't do something and you do it, it's called a sin. I just remind people that complaining is sin. Venting is usually complaining. And we should be hard workers and not complainers. We should be thankful for all we've been given. But as far as work ethic goes, there's some verses. Just again, we're supposed to be hard workers. And God even just says the Proverbs is a very practical book. It's a good reminder. I drilled this when we were in the book of Proverbs, but the book of Proverbs is not a cheat sheet nor a recipe book. The Proverbs should never be taken as if then, period. Meaning the Proverb says, if you this, then this will happen. So we know that it's going to. The Proverbs is basically a very general book of general wisdom of most likely when people are good at things, they get honor. That is a very general principle that is very generally true. So as you go through all the Proverbs and the ones I quoted, just remember that is that there's a lot of great general advice, and it is very generally true very often, but it's not like something we're supposed to use as a recipe cheat sheet to like, well, it says if I do this, then I can get that. Well, in general, yes, that's the way it works. But that's the idea behind Proverbs. Saving, spending, planning. This is, I think, one of the more important sections for the average people today. This is the section, hopefully, you might have a friend who just, here, listen here and start at 26 minutes or however far in, right? And take a listen to this. Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead to surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. In short, when you make choices and purchases hastily, quite often it leads to poverty. It leads to bad choices. It leads to bad things. But when you plan diligently, and again, the latter portion tonight, we'll talk a little bit about planning, nuts and bolts, and good advice. And again, stuff to pass on, stuff that hopefully to get people to listen to. People will hopefully, if they're not here tonight, they'll catch the rerun if they're not watching at home. Because I would love to see a church where there were no money struggles. Why? Well, because they're just using godly principles and God's blessing it. And that would be just an awesome thing where, we have a strong financial health. So our church and all of its members can be helping other people rather than us struggling to get by. Because everyone knows what it's like, feeling you got to pick up an extra shift. You can't come to Bible study because of work, and feeling like you can't go to a retreat because you don't have the money, and feeling like there's a lot of things that people struggle with, and it'd be great if we didn't have those struggles. And so, again, wise, godly spending. It is not a recipe to get rich quick. But quite often it leads to good, strong financial health when we just do what the Bible says. And so the planning of the diligent. Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when the desire comes, it is a tree of life. This is maybe a pinch bit cryptic for some, a little hard to understand maybe, but here's the idea is, there are different ways to define maturity, just overall, not necessarily Christian maturity. And one of the number ones that I always quote again and again is that maturity, one who is mature has the ability to delay pleasure. You can delay pleasures. Meaning, I can see the thing I want and I can wait for it. Hope deferred. Oh, I really want something. But you're deferring it, which means you're setting it off till later. It's something you're kind of putting off. It makes my heart sick. I want everything I want right now, okay? But my wife says, no, you can't have everything you want right now. But why not? It's like, I want it now. But when it comes, right, when it's a tree of life. And the idea is kind of, when the thing finally does come, oh man, it feels so sweet to get it. And hope deferred makes the heart sick. But the thing is, though, is that the diligence, the planning, it's being willing to wait. And most kids, they hear it from me back when I was at school, my homeroom kids, don't finance a new car, don't finance a new car, don't finance a new car, don't finance a new car. They get out of high school, and it's like one of my top shop kids, he goes right out and finances a new car, and he didn't hear the end of it from me. And it became like a joke between us. He's like, I'm sorry, I just had to have my Civic. I'm like, yes, you did. And now you're making payments on a car that's worth less than you paid for it. But that was the thing, is we see it, we want it now. And this goes across. It's the same with sex. It's the same with other things that we're supposed to defer. We're supposed to wait until it's the appropriate godly time, but we want it now. But again, learning to wait for things, it makes such a difference because, again, It saves you money. You're not making interest payments because you charge it to the credit card because you couldn't wait for it. You couldn't wait to save up. Well, now you're paying way more for something because you're making payments on it. And so again, the ability to wait for things until it's the right time. Proverbs 21:20, there is a desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. So, again, there is desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise. What does that mean? Well, that means you've actually saved up your treasure and you've stored it. And oil is your resources. This means you have stores of money and resources, and you keep them stored up for purposes. There's lots of different purposes. I mean, the resources are just so you have what you need for rainy day and for food and but the treasure, you have emergency fund, the big emergency fund, savings up for this or that. But a foolish man squanders it. I have money, I spend money. I have money, I spend money. What do you mean save? And so this is the idea, is that wise people, they save up and they store stuff and they have it for when they need it. And so again, more about that in the practical section in the latter half. Proverbs 27:23, be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds. Does anyone here have sheep? Okay, I guess we can skip this one. No, okay. So the idea is, again, I would directly relate this to our later talk on budgeting. When you're going to budget your income and your outgo. Income, outgo. That's how money works. It comes in, then it goes out. But with a little bit of effort, every single man, woman, and child can calculate how much comes in or estimate, and there's ways to plan when it's irregular, and then look at how much is going to go out. Some going out things don't change. Cell phone payments, presumably you're not doing anything weird or silly, they don't change, right? Some things are fairly consistent. Certain bills don't change a lot. And so it's just like, I know what these are going to be. And so I know the state of my flocks. I know what my electric bill is going to be. I know what my food is going to be. I know what my power bill is going to be. Unless the kids leave the door open with the AC on, then you never know what it's going to be. But that's the thing, is you know these things, and so it is biblical to know what's going on in your financial status, in your home, in your flocks, and you attend to your herds. Might I say, there's a lot of things in your home that need to be attended to. Cars need oil changes. Oil changes cost money, but engine swaps cost more. Things like that, this is attending to your herds. It's knowing the ins and outs, but it's also knowing what needs to be tended to in those regular maintenance things on your home, on your vehicle, on your body. You need checkups from time to time, perhaps. That's the idea, though, is just going through and having these things planned out and planning ahead, being a diligent person. Proverbs 28:20, a faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. In short, if you want to abound with blessings. Now, guys, if we're talking finances, because, man, the rich is the contrast at the end. In finances, how many people would like it if they asked you, how is your family doing financially? We're abounding with blessings. Sounds good to me, right? I mean, if I could say my family's financially abounding with blessings, that sounds good. How do I get there? Be faithful. Be faithful. Almost all, I'm saying almost because it's not that people haven't done it. Almost all get rich quick, hasten, quick. Almost all get rich quick plans fail. Sometimes a few people get lucky and they do make it work, and they're very rare instances. And they're the ones who get the millions of other people to try and follow them and do the same thing and fail. But faithfulness, I will say this, and I feel fairly confident. Unless you make a willful choice to pursue a low-paying career because you feel called by God to it, or to just live a life of poverty because you feel like God has told you to give away everything, unless you make some conscious choices to stay in there, If you start, there's a few young people in the room tonight. Like, if you start young, I think almost anyone can be a millionaire, have at least $1 million by the time you are 65, if you just make faithful choices all the way up. Harder when you start at 45 or 55 or 64 and a half to try and get that million before 65. Then you got to try and hasten, for your riches. But the point is that following godly principles, it's not get rich quick, but it's get abounding with blessings over the long run by making wise choices. And a lot of us, again, we go back to that hope deferred makes the heart sick. I know it probably makes a few of you sick to think about it, but I just remember, again, I'm trying not to throw people under the bus tonight, but someone younger than me with mostly the same genetics who grew up with me. I remember making the comment once, seeing this old guy driving it was like a mid-60s Corvette convertible. And he was into cars. He's like, that's no fair that old guy gets that car. Because he's thinking like, he's so old, why would he enjoy that car? And my mom had to tell him. And he was like a teenager, like maybe 8th grade, 9th grade, right? Young. So he's seeing this, but she's like, he probably waited his whole life until he could afford that car. And he finally bought his teenage car of his dreams. Now as an old man, he's finally gotten the place. We don't know the story behind this guy, but the idea was it took him a long time to get there, but now he has what he's been waiting for. And that's the thing, is faithfulness. We want the car now. We want the status now. But if we're faithful, some of those fun things we've wanted, we might be able to afford them someday. I bought my dream car when I was a kid, and I can't even afford to have it or drive it or fix it, so it just sits collecting dust until one day I'll have the money to actually fix my own car. But that's the thing, I'm waiting for the day that I can actually set aside and do that. Luke 14:28, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Jesus used this as a parable. So this was not the direct teaching. He was not talking about actually building. Jesus wasn't talking about finances, but his parables are based off of truths. And the true story is that he's saying, hey, and they talk about someone going to war. It was the same concept. How foolish would it be to take on an endeavor and not sit down and think of if you can afford it or not? And yet, how many people these days, just because the bank says I qualify, they dive into something. Or the guy at the car dealership says I qualify, so they dive in on something. Or whatever it may be, they didn't really sit down and think about, is this a wise financial decision? And when the day comes, they don't have enough money to finish it. They realize, nope, that was a horrible decision. Speaking of horrible decisions, debt. So, we live in a different world than the time of Jesus. There weren't banks like today in the time of Jesus. It wasn't like today. Interest rates, all different types of loans, all different types of investments, but the same principles in general do apply. And so Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant, and that's our word for slave, to the lender. Servant doesn't sound as bad. I'd rather use slave. Drives home the point. At the end of the day, we see that the rich rule over the poor. Now, we're not trying to become rich so we get to rule over the poor, but it would be nice to not be poor so that I'm not put in a position to be manipulated by those who have money. But the real key to this verse was that second half. The borrower is a slave to the lender. And it really is. When you borrow money, you're stuck paying that money back. And it can be hard. And it depends on what kind of a deal you get into. You get into a credit card, and then you miss a payment, and then they jack the interest rates up. Holy smokes. Like, that's insane what they can go up to, like 30% interest or some really crazy high number, like 29.99. It's insane. Adjustable rate mortgages, adjustable rate things where all of a sudden your interest rate's jumping out of control and you're playing catch up the whole time. It's not a fun place to be. I'm sure anyone farming experience, all the stories of farmers and banks and, a good year and a bad year and just, maybe it's just in TV where farmers have bad years. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like it's when the bank loads you the money, you have a business, and now you're for your business. It's just a tough place to be, and so when you don't have to be in this position, it saves you a lot of headache and puts you in more of a place of power. Proverbs 17:18, a man devoid of understanding shakes his hand in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. I shared this verse talking about money with a college and career group conference last year. All the young people didn't like me telling this verse, but they were okay with it as long as I didn't tell it to their parents. This is the don't co-sign on a loan verse. That's what this means. A man devoid of understanding, he's a little slow, shakes hands in a pledge, becomes surety for his friend. What it's saying is that, no, like, if your friend is going to do a business deal, it's between them and them. Don't you get in there and become the surety. That's what co-signing is. When you can't afford, you only need a co-signer. And I'm not saying there's never a situation, pray about it. That's one thing with money I could have driven home more this morning is there are unique situations all over the place. And oftentimes I will teach it as truth, absolute truth, which is only absolute truth 99.98% of the time. And someone always comes up to me with, but what about this scenario? You're like, that is true. If aliens did invade and then King Tut did come back from the dead, then what I said would be wrong. Like, I just throw it because they come up with these crazy scenarios. But no, there's scenarios. I'm not saying co-signing, there might be a scenario where you feel like it's important. But on the whole, the only reason anyone ever needs a co-signer is because the bank looks at them and says, you are not qualified for this money. You can't afford this. So we need someone who can afford this come alongside you. And the Bible just says it's not a wise thing to do. If they can't afford it, putting your finances on the line isn't wise. So this is also a challenge for typically younger Christians, is don't ask your parents to co-sign on a loan. Look at that one in the camera. Don't ask your parents to co-sign on a loan. Like, get in a position where you can do it yourself. And if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And it is much better just to be on your own man, your own woman, rather than having to depend on others. And so don't go into your own debt. Don't get involved in someone else's debt. And Romans 13:8 is just a beautiful way to summarize it all. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Hey, if you want to owe people something, owe them the love that God has commanded you to love. Rather than money, owe them love. It's just a nice, pretty verse. All right, now, this is actually my last section. Perfect. Generosity. Now, we did talk about giving this morning, but I just wanted to end on the general principle of generosity, of just being generous, because that's what we're called to be. And so that first section on our heart, the love of money. When we have a love of money, we're not going to be generous with money. But when we love God and love people, our generosity, whether that be in the form of tithes and offerings, or more like tonight, what I'm talking about is with each other, that'll show. When we really love God and we don't love money, we're going to be generous with money. Because it's just like, hey, it's okay. I love God. I love you. And my things are your things. We see kind of that act situation. So here's a great verse, 1 John 3:17. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? In short, those of us who have gotten to where we're well off, abounding in blessing, or just steady, and you do see people in real need. Now, you need to pray about if it's real need. You should be praying about, is this guy a freeloader? Does he just want me to support his own, give people money and they go buy drugs? I mean, obviously we don't want to do that. But it's a love thing when I see people who are sincerely in need and I can't open my heart to them. And wherever my treasure is, there my heart is. So my heart's attached to my pocketbook. And so the idea is being generous when you believe it's truly a godly thing. And notice what it says there too, guys. Because this is, I think, going to be something with the next verse too, is when he sees the guy on the corner in need. And that's not what the verse says. His brother in need. You see, Galatians 6, 9, and 10, let us not grow weary while doing good, but for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity. Now, he was just talking about reaping and sowing 2 verses earlier. So just the same words Paul used in this morning's text in 2 Corinthians, the idea of reaping and sowing. Let us, as we have opportunity, do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. I'll be honest, and you've probably heard it from me before. As you study the Word of God, there is a strong consistency about giving, supporting, helping money within the body of Christ. Way more than you ever see something about just giving money to the people on the corner, giving money out over here and over there, but supporting the church and helping the people within the church. John 13:35, by this they will know you are my disciples, when they see how much you give to people out in the community. No, when they see your love for one another. When the people on the outside of the church look into the church and see your love for one another, then they'll know. When the family member asks, what happened? I thought you were in need. Oh, my church helped me. Oh, wow, your church is different. Yeah, this is the church helping the church. And as you keep sending money out of the church, I'm giving money to unbelievers. I'm not saying we never do it either. We haven't done it in a long time, though. It's actually been nice. There's been less people coming and asking, random drop-bys. But it's like, oh, I'll come to church. They never come to church. I don't think anyone's ever actually came to church. The people who came, we've covered an electric bill. I'll come to church on Sunday, and they've never come. So now, as far as I know, they have a paid electric bill, and they still have a lost soul. Did I help? I don't know if that was even helping the situation. But when the church helps the church, there's something really powerful there. And so I would encourage all of us to be really thinking about giving within our church. And I've actually told people when they've asked me for money, or people have asked me directly, they may even know me, I just said, I do my giving through my church. And when I help people in need, it's through my church. And if you would like money, come to my church and we can help you. But that's how it works. We take care of our own. And if you want to come in here and sit through a Sunday service and meet with one of our elders after the service and talk, we can help you. I'll pay you to come to church. You need help again? Okay, well, come talk to our elders again the next Sunday. But the idea is that within the body of Christ. And then this is a general principle. Last verse, Acts 20:35. Paul talking to the elders of Ephesus as he was passing through, I'm never going to see you again, as he's wrapping up, I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. So firstly, he's exhorting them, I've shown you by example how to support the weak people in the church. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus that he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Might I say, it would revolutionize our lives and our finances if God could get us to a place where I could actually say with confidence, I truly believe I'm more blessed to give than receive. That will change the way you look at money. When your heart is changed, your view of money is changed, then your budgeting, your spending, your saving, all that stuff just falls into place because God has gotten your heart right with money. And then it's easy to make decisions like, it's easy for me to save money because God has given me contentment, so I'm not blowing it on silly things. It's easy for me to invest my money because I'm not, worried about this and that. It's easy for me to, and so again, it's always going to be a heart thing. If we can get our hearts right with money, all the other things that typically our hearts are desiring, they'll actually come. But if we go after the things, our hearts stay messed up and those things never happen. We work on our heart, it seems like we get our heart and the things. So the double blessing of seeking the Lord in obedience. So let's just say a quick prayer, and we're going to transition. We're going to have Roberta come and share some stories of God's faithfulness in her life. Father God, I thank you so much for your word, for these lessons, and I pray still tonight as we continue to stream this for people to listen to at later dates and even online right now, God, that the people who need to hear it, hear it. I pray that we could, in later dates, whenever, but I pray, God, that you would free the people of our church body and the body of Christ at large from financial troubles, Lord, that come from unbiblical practices. And so, God, I pray that you would save us from from unbiblical practices, unbiblical mindsets, and that by our faithfulness to studying your word and obeying it and seeking your face, that you'd solve these financial problems that people struggle with, and then that would allow us, God, just to be able to focus not on money problems, not on picking up extra shifts and extra hours, but focus on just you and the ministries you've called us to and the family you've made us a part of. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You can go wherever you want. You can sit down up here. You can stand right there. You've got choices.
Should do something. And in the Episcopal Church, they always have their pledges. And so you give your pledge every year. Well, you got to understand this is back a long time ago. So Stan and I were giving $5 a month to the church, which would be like $50 today, which may sound like a lot to you guys, $50, but that would mean you were only making $500 is all that's coming in if you're talking about 10% tithe. So the first thing that happened was we decided, well, maybe $5 was, and as Joe said this morning, we also would wait till the end of the month, and then oftentimes we didn't have the $5. So the first thing that happened was we realized we needed to change that and start giving the $5 first because by the third, my husband is a retired teacher, and so we would get paid once a month, so then by the third day of the month, we would be broke. So if we didn't have the $5, if we didn't give the $5 at the first, oftentimes we didn't have it by the end of the month. So we changed that. And then the second thing was we decided that maybe we should be a little more generous. So we started giving more money. Well, right in there, Thanksgiving came. This was our first real experience with this, was Thanksgiving came, and in the Episcopal Church, they have a Thanksgiving service on Wednesday night, and they send you out an envelope, and they want you to put money in the plate. So sometimes Thanksgiving comes far enough away from the end of the month that you don't get your paycheck till a week after Thanksgiving. So, and that was one of those years. So we weren't going to get paid till like Friday the following week. And we had $10 in the checking account. And so I said, well, and everything that I say isn't me, it's Stan and I together. So when I say I, it's not I, it's the two of us together. But what do we do? Should we give we have $10 left. Should we put it in the plate? But there was a place here in town that's now the bakery across from Extra Mile. She sold milk, and she had milk books. And you could go and buy a milk book for $10, and that gave you 10 gallons of milk. And we had one coupon left in our milk book, and we needed milk. So on Friday, we were going to go spend that one coupon, and we had till the next Friday to get more money. So we debated back and forth. Shall we put the $10 in the plate, or shall we spend the $10 on a milk book? Well, we finally decided we put the $10 in the plate, and on Friday morning, Stan went to spend the $10 coupon, or the dollar coupon that we had, and empty our book, and when he got up to the window, she was having some sort of a lottery. We won a milk book. And was that God, or is that God? In our faithfulness, we were just neophytes. We didn't even know what we were doing, but he was faithful. And I am really passionate about this because we have learned so many places over the years, Stan and I, how faithful God is when you are faithful in what he asks you to do. And so from there, we knew that someplace in this, we learned that we really needed to be giving 10%. And not 10% of our net, but 10% of our gross. And so we honestly didn't have the faith to just start doing that. So every time something would happen, then we would start increasing. I remember one time, it was in the 80s when we had high inflation like what we've had here recently, and Stan got a $100 a month raise. And that was a big deal. And so, okay, now this means such and such. And the Holy Spirit said, no, I want that, because that's going to bring you to your 10%. Oh, okay. And we did, and we never went without, even though we really needed that $100 raise. And there were just so many places in those years where, God, I remember I happened to be doing the treasurer of the Christian school's taxes. And while I'm doing that, the Holy Spirit began to speak to me that he wanted our children to attend the Christian school in Sunnyside. Well, I didn't have any idea how we were going to afford that. We were living on one salary, teacher's salary. But we prayed about it, and we felt like that we needed to do that. Well, I was, at this point in time, I had after I quit teaching, I got involved in doing taxes. And so I was doing that, and I was working for someone else. And so Stan and I decided that we couldn't afford to tithe that year, that God wanted to provide for the Christian school tuition through the tithe off the money that I was making. And it wasn't going to cover the whole thing, but it would cover some of it. So we put that money aside. Except by the time September came, the money was gone. How it went, we have no idea, because that's how God's economy works. Somehow, if you don't give it to him, he takes it. I don't know how that happens, but it works that way. Maybe you have a car repair that you need to do that takes your extra money. It just happens that way. So then, September, we had to just, every month, God provided in a different way. And just to watch him do that and see how that works. And we just didn't ever have any extra, but he always provided, and he would tell us to do something. Like these friends of ours decided they were going to start a construction business. And the Holy Spirit spoke to us and said, I want you to help them out. You need to put a shower in your bathroom downstairs. Oh, okay, well, where are we going to get the money from that? I don't even, to this day, I don't remember where that came from, but it was some source that I would never have guessed. One time we needed insurance money, and my husband was teaching for YVC, and originally they had 3 payments per quarter, but somewhere in there they decided to do a screwball thing where they would have 4 payments for the winter quarter. And it was really confusing because you were getting a January, February, March payment originally, and then April, May, and June. And all of a sudden we're getting a January, February, March, 2 April checks, May, June. It was crazy. And so we would get a little bit confused about whether we'd gotten that second check. So one day I get we had this insurance payment we needed to make, and I get a phone call from YVC. The lady goes, we don't think you cashed your paycheck for April. Oh, okay, well, that's been a little bit confusing to us. And guess what? That paycheck was exactly what we needed for that insurance payment. And I know it was because we had learned to be faithful to God and what he was asking us to do in terms of giving. Sometimes it meant that we had to sacrifice over here because somebody else had a need. And just that faithfulness and just seeing how God has worked in our lives over and over and over. One time, our daughter wanted to go to campfire camp. And you guys probably don't even know what campfire is anymore, but it's a comparable thing to Girl Scouts. I think we still do have Girl Scouts. And so she could sell so much. If she sold so much we didn't have the money for camp. So if she had sold so much campfire candy, then she could go to camp. Well, so she's out selling her campfire candy, and it's in November. And Christmas is coming up. That's important because when she gets back from selling candy with her father, she says to me, Mom, where's my change money? I go, I don't have your change money. It was in the box. No, I don't have the money. I said, it was in your box. Okay, so that meant that she lost that change money, and it was $44. Well, $44 when you're making a tenth of what you make now for a teacher's salary. And Christmas is coming up. Oh, my goodness. So they go out to look to see if they can find this money. And I sit down and I pray. And this doesn't happen very often. But as I was praying, I saw this fence. And I saw this money up against this fence. Well, I knew it wasn't our fence, but I had to go out and check it anyway because maybe I just wasn't seeing this fence right. Well, the money wasn't there. So the next day, I was volunteering at the school, and I got done with the volunteering just as school got out. So I picked the kids up. Instead of their coming home on the bus, I brought them home with me. And I'm driving down here to Grandview because they was in Sunnyside. And I didn't know how much of a miracle this was concerning my daughter at the time. But anyway, I said to my daughter, Stephanie, can you tell me how to get to the house where you were last night selling that candy? And she goes, yes. Which, sidebar, that woman cannot find her way out of a paper bag, literally. So how this happened had to have been part of the miracle because she really doesn't understand directions. She just is challenged that way. But anyway, so she gets me to the house, and so we go this road, this road, this road. And then she says, turn left. Okay, so I turn left, and the house is over here on this side in this corner. And I look over here, and here's that fence. And here's money up against that fence. And every bit of that $44 was there. Now, to add to that, the wind was blowing so hard in the night. How that money stayed there, I have no idea. And it blew in the entire day. The project we were working on was doing paper drive, and we had to go get tarps to hold these papers in place. So, and the kids walked past that fence to go to school. But see, God that was where it was. And those kinds of things that have happened in our lives over and over and over. When my husband retired from teaching, we had some decisions to make, and it was hard to know what to do. And I was praying about it, and Stan, he really doesn't like dealing with money, and so he was expecting me to kind of help make this decision. And I was feeling really burdened by it, and I started praying, I was praying, but somewhere in my prayers, the Holy Spirit said to me, it doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to take care of you. And that's always the truth of the principle. He always takes care of us when we're faithful to him. And when we're not, Stan and I would always know, oh yeah, well, we'd have a car repair. And that isn't how he works with everybody. Well, it was a car repair. If we started having a car repair, we would realize that we hadn't he had spoken to our hearts about giving someplace, and we hadn't totally followed through on that. And, it isn't just the tithe and the 10%. That's where it begins. It's going way beyond that and when God speaks to your heart, believing him. And he's taught probably myself more than Stan needed to be taught. I'm the one that really needed to know that he is totally in charge and you can totally trust him. And when he speaks to your heart and says give, that he is going to cover that out of his economy, not out of yours. One time he asked me to be on a board of a parachurch thing that meant I was going to have to travel to Spokane and Walla Walla and Yakima and Wenatchee, each different place each month. And it was during the 80s when gas was comparable to the price that it is today, like it was comparable to like $5 a gallon economy-wise. And we had a budget, and we were barely staying underneath the limit on our gas budget for that. And I okay, you want me to do this, but I don't know how this is going to work because we're already at the max on our gasoline. But he kept urging me that that's what he wanted, and that's what he wanted, and so on. Do you know, in that 2 years that I was on that board and doing that traveling, we never went over our gas budget. I don't know. It's God's economy. And once over 20 years ago, the Lord told me to buy the building. I had my office at home, and he told me to purchase the building that I'm in downtown. And, well, how am I going to take care of this thing? And you know, he has been so faithful. When you're faithful to him, he's faithful to you. And so many times I've had a need, and how am I going to, because the first thing that happened was the doorknob quit working. So we were having people come around to the back door, and all of a sudden, Pat Mason's standing there in front of me, and he goes, hey, I can take that doorknob off if you'd like so that people can come in the front door, but I don't have time. I've got to go to a meeting, so I don't have time to replace the doorknob, but I'm willing to take it off so you can make the door work. So I spent the next 2 hours, okay, that's great, and he did it. How am I going to guard this thing all night? Am I going to have to put my cot in front of this door? You know, I didn't know how this was going to work. But 2 hours later, here's another guy standing there. I look up, and I have a break, and I look up, and he's standing there, and I knew that he had the capabilities of doing this. So I go out there, and I go, Roger, do you have an hour? He goes, yeah. I go, would you mind going and getting a doorknob and putting it in for me? Oh, sure, I can do that. Problem solved. You know, God's just so faithful. And that's the whole thing. And the thing that I've thought about today, you know, we're having our challenges right now. And because of the financial, because we didn't have any money, we had to be faithful. We didn't have any extra. We didn't have Kmarts and Walmarts and Costco's and that kind of thing in my day when we were raising our kids. TV sets were just to get, there was a time when we went 3 years without a TV set because we couldn't afford it, because you just didn't have that. The way things were not as reasonably priced because weren't outsourcing to China the way we are today. And just that faithfulness, that's where we learned the faithfulness of God through our finances and through the faithful giving. And you know, it's because of all of that we can walk what we're walking out right now with our daughter. And it's not an easy walk, but I know the faithfulness of God, because for all these years, he has been so faithful to us. And it started with the finances and the giving. And just do it. There's a gentleman by the name of Randy Alcorn who has a ministry in Portland. And he's written several books, and one of them is called Money, Possessions, and Eternity. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is, if you want your heart to be somewhere, put your money there, because your heart will follow your money. And it's really the truth. If you want a heart, God has put on your heart, first off, just to have a heart for this church. If you don't have a heart for this church, start giving money. Start giving your money here, and you'll start having that heart for this place. Now, I don't know who I'm speaking to, but I believe that that's an important thing to say, is if you want to have a heart for missions, start giving to missions. But start with the church, because that's really your first responsibility. And but because of what we have found, we're able to walk this thing out with our daughter, not knowing what's going to happen, not having a clue, and not having good reports here and there and things that are going on. And it's wonderful that we have your support and your prayers, and we need all of that. but our experience with walking with God is probably the best training ground that we could have for what we're walking right now. And it started with giving.
Some of Roberta's stories, and so you can pick left or right. You get choices. And so I just knew asking Roberta, we'd have a lot of good stuff. I think I got even more than I knew I was signing up for, because I thought I knew all her stories, but I guess I was wrong. All those hours hanging out in the office together, and I'm still learning new stuff. So I know somebody actually messaged in a question they had, and so I'm trying to make sure I have these things all lined up too. So nuts and bolts. I asked my wife to come up here. Here's the microphone. I'm going to give you a microphone. You have to hold a button to turn it on. Because she's really good at helping us with all of our stuff. And so, but I'm going to take up a big chunk of it. But there's a few things I told her, you do this. I don't do this. You're in charge of this stuff. And much like the Proverbs 31 woman, she oversees things in our house, and I don't oversee them. You know, she is over these areas. If I may be over the house, but she's over these areas, and she makes all those decisions, and I defer all those decisions to her because I trust her to make wise decisions. So that said, practical nuts and bolts about money. You know, I can't deny that financial peace, Dave Ramsey, you know, it's not for everyone. Some people love Dave Ramsey. Some people are not as a fan of Dave Ramsey. But you know what? He is a Christian guy, and he based this off of Christian principles, and I think it's a great starting place. I will say this, too. His advice, it's good to know even if you don't need it, because you know people who need it. And his advice is designed to apply to everyone, meaning if I had to make a set of policies, these baby steps, and I had to say, everyone in the church must follow this. But what about this person? They have a unique, what about that person? I know, but if I had to make one set of steps that would work for everyone, that's kind of what he shot for, in the sense of this works for everyone, and other people might be able to get away with investing differently or doing things differently. But here's just his baby steps. I just want to share them. I know many of us know them, but again, it's a good review so you can recite them, people. He always had his $1,000 emergency fund as the first thing, setting aside $1,000 so that you don't have to charge a credit card for when a refrigerator breaks, a car breaks, or something like that happens. It's just that small emergency fund. $1,000 might not seem small, but even, you know, that's been around for a long time too. I've heard even higher numbers he's tossed out now, especially he's like, well, if you have a bigger house with more kids and more this and that, he's like, you might want to do $1,500 or $2,000, but a starting amount. Next is his debt snowball, paying off all your debts except your home. Every loan, every credit card, every car payment, anything you have as a payment, except your primary residence, pay it all off. And so he talks about how, we'll talk about how in a second. I'm just going to review these really quick. And that's really step 2 is we're going to spend a lot of time talking, just really practical stuff on budgeting in the world we live in today. But he basically says, once you're debt-free, minus a house payment, he says, well, now save up like 3 to 6 months of expenses. And so this is so that really if someone loses a job or something serious happens, again, you're not having to go beg for money. You're not having to charge to a credit card because you've planned. This is just like we were talking about in Scripture earlier. You have storehouses. You have treasures stored up for when this time comes. He then talks about investing into your retirement as a next step, saving up for your children's college, and his last 2 is paying off your home and building wealth and giving it away. Those last few towards the end, or after we go through really the practical nuts and bolts of the budgeting stuff, I'll touch on them briefly, but they're very specific for different people when it comes to things like investing and things like that. I'll give some general stuff, and I had some general questions asked, so I'll look at those. But really, right off the bat, and you can chime in at any time if I'm missing something. I know you're dying to talk. That's my wife. But we want to share some of the ways that we have done our budgeting, because we've led Dave Ramsey's financial peace class, and we've done things our way, but it's really helped us with our finances. And I don't want to give like our whole story, and we were trying just to kind of give the broad view, but when we got married, I had no job, my vehicle broke down, and I had a lot of college debt. But I had good looks and charisma, and so she still married me. But were you making $7 an hour, or was it $10 an hour? Never mind. Okay, she was making $10 an hour, part-time, full-time? You're full-time. I don't remember all these things. And she made some extra cash doing her spinning classes at the YMCA. So, we were doing well. But then she went back to school, though. And so it was like we had tough times when we were first married. We did not have a lot of money. We lived in a little tiny fourplex unit, and we had a screaming good deal on rent, though. We paid $400 a month for rent back then. And even back then, that was a really good deal for Ellensburg. So we had God was looking out for us for sure, but we still had to budget very rigidly to survive. And I think one of the big things I want to share is that we are now doing so much better off than we used to, both of us having college educations, going into careers that had, and both of us were working for most of our marriage. We've both worked, but we still live by those same principles we laid down early on. We started a habit of budget and planned spending and living, and because of that, still today, we're doing the same stuff we've always done. We're more flexible now. Now I can afford to buy something like nice at the grocery store once in a while, but for the most part, it's one thing, it's a habit, and it's a lifestyle you develop. And there are millionaires who drive clunker cars and eat budget stuff and coupon because that's how they became a millionaire, was they were wise with their money, and they just stayed wise. So, few categories for budgeting. We're just going to talk about utilities. For the most part, you can turn off every light in your house, and you can do all those things to try and keep the expenses down. But I think we were just talking about, we always kind of felt like for us, utilities, we didn't do anything extreme that would be radically changing our utilities. And so we just try to figure out to budget. We know what they cost. We know what to plan for. You mentioned putting things on the easy pay, or where you pay the same amount every month. You can do that for some utilities where instead of electric or water, they can just average it out and you pay the same payment every month. And so especially if you're tight on budgeting, that's at least consistent, and that way I'm paying the same every month. I'll pause real quick too and just say, for the rest of tonight, this whole last section of what we're doing right now, if you have a specific question about utilities, just stop me and ask. As we're going on here, this is like a Q&A/presentation. So if you got something you want to ask about utilities, you can stop us and we can talk about utilities for a second. But we were looking at our cash flow, at our budget, and it's like, well, we'll mention utilities, but that's not where the big, usually people spend what they spend because that's just what utilities cost. But then when it gets to grocery shopping, this is a category where many people are in different places when it comes to grocery shopping. And something we talked about is that, if you are in a season where you qualify for food stamps, people get a lot of money for food stamps. The problem is you can develop really unhealthy grocery shopping practices. My goal for my whole church, obviously people are coming in at different places, is that we're all working in a direction where you would never qualify for food stamps someday. Maybe right now you're in a season where you do qualify. Well, hopefully God will provide you a job, your spouse gets a raise, however it works, where you won't qualify. But now that you have to actually budget your own money for food, it's going to pinch and hurt more, and you need to have good practices. And so before I hand it over to Nicole for a second, I looked at the USDA estimated cost per person per month. So they actually have estimates of what each person in your household, so you have a 1-person, 2-person, 3-person household, what it should cost per food per month. And they had it in different budget categories. They say with a liberal budget, $360 a person. On a moderate budget, $300 a person. The USDA called a low-cost budget $240 a person. Then they had their thrifty budget, $225 a person. Then I asked Nicole, how much do we spend per person on food? And she went and looked it up on our bills, and she says, we do $125 a person. Almost half of the low-cost thrifty spending. And it's funny because I guess, people recently heard that and thought that was surprising. Definitely. So one thing is, so the question is, is it because our children are younger? I will say this before I told you I was going to have her take over, but I will say that I think there's 2 factors with these numbers, because these are, I don't know where they got them. Google popped up other numbers, often somewhere between 150 and 300. But the first thing that shows up on Google, the cost per person for food, it said in Washington, $400 a person, the 10th highest in the nation. So they actually said $400 a person for food. All these numbers are subjective, but I think a big key is, I do think with more people, you will actually get away with a little bit less per person because there's more people in the house, so you can buy in bulk and you can kind of divide it out. So I do think I don't think just Nicole would live off of $125 by herself. Maybe I wouldn't live off $125 by myself, but she probably would find a way to. But as you get more people, I think you'll save a little bit. And also, yes, little kids definitely eat less than teenagers. That's going to be a huge difference. But I don't think we're going to make it to the thrifty category. I think we'd still be seeing much less.
And does that include your paper products and everything?
Kinda? Because you were just looking at grocery store, she actually was just totaling up. 125 was our average for April and May. April and May divided, and it was like one was actually higher and one was lower, because she's like, well, this is one where we went and we did a big bulk run. So actually one month was like $200 or $300 more than the other month, because this was the month we stocked up on bulk supplies, and then the next month we didn't. But yeah, that actually would be including lots of that kind of stuff, like paper and those types of grocery store type purchases. But let everyone know your secrets. It's up to you now. I'll hold that button. There you go. Green light. Yep.
I think, like with paper products, we don't have a Costco membership. So we go to Costco every 6 months and stock up.
With her parents.
With my parents. And so we have a one-time or every 6-month bill for that stuff. And I don't allow paper towel use very much. That's the other.
Yeah.
But for budgeting, what we do is I find the ad, find out what's on sale that week, and that's how I meal plan, and that's what we eat. And so we have a freezer, we buy whatever, all the meat that's on sale, we buy as much as you can buy. I go to Fred Meyer, so you can buy 5 of everything at the price. And then that's how I make my meals. That's how I cook. I have my staples, and I only shop every 2 weeks, so that we eat everything that we bought. So by the end of the 2 weeks, you're being creative with what you have. But I do a lot of sale shopping so that we have things on hand, and that's what we cook with. We don't do a lot of packaged things. We don't do a lot of things that are pre-made. It's all in bulk, like you said, like bags of oatmeal, bags of beans, bags of potatoes, so things like that. And knowing the things that we'll eat, and when I know it's on sale then. So I just watch the prices.
Where do you shop?
Fred Meyer.
And? We go to Winco.
Oh, Winco, yeah.
You do Winco.
We do a Winco like every 3 or 4 months and do the bulk.
Yeah, bulk spices and dry goods and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then, so you said every 2 weeks, we'll usually do like maybe a weekly banana and milk run.
Yeah, but we try to avoid the weekly runs because when you send your
Oh,
husband
yeah.
to the store,
Hey,
his budget of like banana and milks turns into like $45.
when we were first married, what was our food budget?
$200.
We did $200 a month. I went to the store to get meat because I wanted to make meatloaf because I was using my mom's recipe. I spent $70 on dinner that night. When we were doing $200 a month, I went for $7 because that's what he didn't send me to the store. But she actually did. She totaled up like 3 months of stuff, and she actually pointed out, like, notice how on this month it's like that was a $360 grocery. So we'll do the 2 shopping cart. We're a 2 shopping cart family. Like we have 2 full shopping carts at Winco, and they are to the brim full. And if you know Winco, you have to pack your own bags. So it's like a system. All the kids know their roles as we're trying to pack 2 to the brim overloaded shopping carts of food. But it's like we get the stuff there that's a good deal, and then we get the stuff at Fred Meyer that's a good deal at Fred Meyer, and if we're desperate, Walmart and Safeway. Yeah. And it's actually, I mean, like, it's one of those things, like we found that like where the good deals are, we go, and then it's like Walmart and Safeway, we shop there plenty, but we just found like wherever you find the cheap this, that's, you just know these stores have good this, those stores have good that. But she was pointing out how like the month where we spent a lot more in May, though, there's a lot of like a $19 visit, a $30 visit, a $14 visit. And it's like, it's those visits that really add up your grocery bill. Not so much the $200, $300 trips where you buy everything, you plan everything out, and you get it. And I think she makes it sound nice. It's miserable living in our house, people. It's December, and I'm like, it sounds really good, asparagus. She's like, it's not asparagus season. I know, but the store still sells it. We can't have it until it's asparagus season. So I go months on end without, and we joke, but it's true. Like, we go months without certain foods because it's $4 a pound instead of $2 a pound. So we just don't eat those foods that time of year.
And cheese freezes. So
Oh, yeah.
when cheese is on sale.
So is milk, right? I know, we were talking about that, about trying that too, because she said you... Yeah, so, yeah, our kids go through milk pretty quick. But yeah, milk freezes, cheese freezes.
Butter freezes.
Butter freezes. We freeze a lot of stuff. Buns freeze. We freeze all of our buns and breads. So it is like, so we go to a store that has cheap bread, and we don't buy it, for what it's worth, we don't buy cheap bread. Like, we don't buy Dave's Killer Bread. That's only like on my birthday. But like, we buy like a whole wheat, whole grain, like, like an actual kind of a meatier bread, but a cheaper, one of those. But it's not like we don't do Wonder Bread or whatever. We do, I don't know. How... Yeah. And so buying all these things, so we buy them, but we freeze. We'll go and we buy like 6 loaves of bread. And they go in the freezer, and they just come out as they're needed. But we go where there's a thing. And hey, I will say, I mean, it's not easy to shop like that if you don't have the money to go spend $400 at the grocery store. And we also mentioned freezer space. Like, it is, like having multiple freezers is very handy, and we use a lot of our freezers. So we're able to save a little bit because we have those extra freezers, and it really adds up because it's like when meat goes on sale, the guys, we were doing all of our diet stuff, and I was like, man, I want that 95% lean ground beef. And she's like, well, if it's on sale, yes. And if it's not, no. Like, it's just that simple. It's like, oh, but it's like,
And it was.
And it was.
It was on sale.
So she buys the full max amount, and it is. You get it as cheap, if not cheaper even, than what 80/20 sells for when you get it at a good deal. So, I mean, there's a lot more groceries tricks. I will say, too, like, she still does a lot of digital coupons. We don't really cut coupons anymore. But early on, when we were even tighter, we got papers. We'd get papers from friends. Or no, we learned that the newspaper, you could get it at the Dollar Tree for cheaper than you could get it at Safeway.
The Sunday paper.
Sunday
for
paper was
$1.
more expensive, so we knew where to get the Sunday paper for $1 cheaper. And like, everything added up, though, and it really did. And so I think, like I said earlier, this is a great example where the food, we still live off these principles that helped us when we were at our really thin times, so that now it helps us all the more, that we have way more kids, we have way more going on, but we make, real wise choices. What? I know. We're going to have a no seconds on meat policy in our house. All right, honey, what's our eating? How often do we eat out?
How often do you want to eat out?
Don't tell them how often I wish we could eat out. How often do we eat out?
We try to eat out like once a month.
That's pretty normal.
yeah.
As a family, we talked about though, like we realized that like we needed some time. And our kids are old enough now, we could leave them home. Like if we left at nap time, you know, the babies are down, the older kids can run the house, and they know how to call us off of the little Google thing in our kitchen. So it's like, so we went on dates. So we were actually going on a weekly date, and we were actually eating out, and that was like unheard of for us. In the entirety of our 14 years of marriage, it's like going out once a week to eat was crazy. But it was good to get out. And we might do that again sometime here soon, but it's like, yeah, we don't really eat out very much.
That includes like when I go to work, I don't buy food at work. I
When-
don't
When we go to events.